In the middle of the empty ballroom, surrounded by dusty mirrors and curtains that swayed with a breeze no one could feel, an old gramophone spun slowly, but without sound. The record turned as if time itself was still waiting for a moment that never arrived. On the worn wooden floor, faint traces of footsteps remained, as though someone had danced there just yesterday, but the place had been locked for decades. What was truly unsettling wasn't the silence, but how alive it felt. Every night, precisely at 11 p.m., the unmistakable scent of jasmine filled the room, even though the windows had long been sealed shut. No one could explain it, and most had stopped trying. Why would a place stop echoing music, yet continue breathing the memory of a dance? And what makes love last beyond time, even when time itself has given up? The answer, though difficult to accept, is heartbreakingly simple. Some promises are made with such truth that even death cannot break them. And some silences speak louder than any song. Sometimes it's what isn't said that echoes across decades, and when you finally learn to hear it, that's when everything changes. The village of St. Aurel was known for its long winters and for stories that never quite died. A small town tucked between misty hills and winding woods, where people still tipped their hats and locked their shutters at the first sign of wind. Everyone knew about the mansion at the far end of Doral Street, a forgotten theater where no one had performed since 1965. But every child raised in that village had heard the same whisper. That's where she danced for the last time. Eleanor Blench had once been the soul of the stage. Her presence was so hypnotic that even men who claimed to despise ballet would pause, spellbound, to watch her move. She didn't speak often. She let the silence carry her stories, and her eyes held questions that no one could quite answer. But there was one detail only a few knew. All her solos shared one strange habit, a single beat of hesitation, as if she were always waiting for someone who never came. Some say her partner died days before their greatest performance. Others believe he never existed, that he was just a fantasy, created from longing. But hidden in her dressing room are letters no one ever delivered. One ends with the words, "Even if you never return, I'll dance for us both, every night at 11, until you hear me." And that's exactly what she did, night after night, until the theater doors closed forever. Since then, those who dare to stand on that stage say they hear footsteps that do not match their own. It was early autumn when Julian arrived, a theater restorer and expert in antique acoustics, hired to evaluate whether the building could be salvaged. Practical, analytical, a skeptic by nature, he never believed in ghosts, but something about the way the locals avoided eye contact when he mentioned the theater unnerved him, especially the old woman who stopped him at the bakery and whispered, "If you go in, listen with your heart, not your ears." On his first inspection, Julian walked in alone, flashlight in one hand, notebook in the other. The air inside was thick, not dusty, just heavy. And every time he turned away from the stage, he felt a presence behind the curtain, not threatening, more like waiting. On the third night, he brought a vintage tape recorder to capture the natural acoustics, but what it recorded was something impossible to explain. At exactly 11 p.m., the gramophone spun on its own. No music played, yet on the tape, two sets of footsteps, perfectly synchronized. Julian kept coming back. He started mapping the movements, laying tape along the floor to trace the old steps. There was a pattern, a dance, repeating itself in silence. One evening, almost without thinking, he reached out his hand into empty space. What he felt chilled him to the bone, something cold but not threatening, like time folding inward. He rushed home, heart pounding, unable to shake one thought. What if she's still dancing, waiting for someone who never arrived? And what if he did, just too late? He told himself it was due to work, reports to file, calls to return, sketches to complete. But in truth, something inside him had shifted. What he'd felt when he reached into the air, it wasn't just cold. It was intimate, like interrupting something sacred. And he wasn't ready to confront what that meant. But the theater never really left him. He heard rhythms in traffic, saw shadows moving in mirrors, and every night at 11 p.m., No matter where he was in the house, a faint scent of jasmine would find him. He even unplugged the heating vents, checked every cabinet and drawer. Nothing. He didn't tell anyone. Who would believe it? On the fourth day, something pulled him back. Not guilt, not curiosity. It felt more like obligation. Inside the theater, the dust seemed lighter, less oppressive. The air didn't hang as heavily as before. He walked quietly across the floorboards, tracing the outlines he'd marked. The tape was still in place, slightly curled at the edges. He stood in the center, eyes closed, letting silence guide him. Then he heard it, a breath, one soft, measured inhale. He spun around, nothing there, but he was certain this time. It wasn't mechanical, not a draft or the creak of wood. Someone was there, watching or waiting. "Eleanor," he said out loud, unsure why he chose to speak her name. Maybe it was instinct, maybe it was belief. The stillness grew heavier, not in fear, in presence. He turned to the recorder and clicked it on again. It whirred, hissed gently. He pressed record, stepped back into the center of the dance floor, and once more extended his hand into the air. He waited, and then a touch, not like before. This time it was warm, just for a second, the brush of fingers against his palm. Gentle, decisive, feminine. Julian dropped the recorder. The next morning he drove to the village archives, a quiet building with creaky floors and a sleepy librarian named Bethany Mercer, who wore wool cardigans even in summer and could remember the birth year of every mayor since 1900. He told her he was looking for information on Eleanor Blanche. Bethany frowned gently. "Strange," she said. "You're the second person to ask about her this week." Julian's heart skipped. "Who was the first?" "Some woman," Bethany replied, tugging open a drawer. "Elegant, American, maybe late 60s. Didn't leave a name. Said she was researching her mother." Odd thing, that. Julian felt a sudden chill. They sat together as Bethany opened a file labeled Blanche Eleanor, 1938-1965? The question mark wasn't an error. Eleanor had never officially been declared dead. She vanished after the theater closed. Some believed she moved away. Others insisted she'd taken her own life in the dressing room. Her final performance was recorded in a local newspaper. Eleanor Blanche delivers haunting solo to empty audience. Curtains fall, doors close. But one clipping stood out. A police report, dated 2 weeks later. Night security guard claims to hear music and footsteps nightly at 11:00 p.m. Witness refuses to return. Theater locked indefinitely. Julian took a photo of the file and drove home with a million questions. But the one that gnawed at him the most wasn't about Eleanor. It was about the woman who had asked about her. That night he returned again. He brought fresh batteries, a notebook, and for some reason he couldn't explain. A single white rose. He placed it on the center of the stage. "Who are you?" he whispered to the shadows. "And what are you waiting for?" The gramophone didn't move this time. No music, no footsteps, just stillness, until he heard a voice, a real human voice. Her name wasn't Eleanor. Julian turned, nearly dropping his flashlight. A woman stood in the center aisle, mid-60s, perhaps older, silver-streaked hair, well-dressed in an old-fashioned, elegant coat. She looked like she'd stepped out of a different decade. She called herself Eleanor Blanche, the woman said, but that wasn't her real name. She changed it the year she ran away from New York. Julian stepped forward, heart racing. "Who are you?" She smiled softly, painfully. "I'm her daughter." Her name was Clara Mason, and she'd spent her life piecing together fragments of a woman who never truly existed. "My mother was born Margaret Elkins. She was raised in Brooklyn, gifted dancer, married my father, Joseph Mason, when she was 19. Then, one day, she disappeared, left everything. I was 2. Clara's voice shook, but her hand stayed perfectly still. My father never recovered. He said she couldn't live in the real world. Said she danced like she was chasing ghosts. For a while, I hated her. Then, I started searching. Her search led her through letters, rumors, old playbills. Every trail ended cold, until she found a photograph, a black and white image from a local newsletter in Saint Aurel, dated 1963. A woman mid-pirouette. No name, but Clara recognized the eyes. She'd followed that photo here. Julian listened in stunned silence. "I don't think she's dead," Clara whispered. "Not completely." "I think part of her stayed." Julian nodded, almost involuntarily. "I've felt it too." They sat together in the dim light of the stage, two strangers stitched together by grief, silence, and someone neither had truly known. And then Clara said something that would change everything. "My father, Joseph, he was supposed to join her here. He promised, but he never came." Julian looked up, startled. "Why not?" Clara blinked slowly. "He was arrested the day before. Draft evasion. He never told her. Spent 3 years in prison. By the time he got out, the theater had already closed. He wrote her dozens of letters. She never responded. He died believing she'd forgotten him." Julian felt as if the walls were closing in. "She didn't forget," he said softly. "She waited." That night, Julian and Clara returned together. The tape was rolling. At 11 p.m., nothing happened. But at 11:02, a soft melody began, not from the gramophone, from nowhere. It was faint at first, then slowly rising. A piano, one he hadn't heard before, a tune neither of them could name but somehow felt familiar. Longing, grief, hope. Clara stood in the center of the stage and closed her eyes. "She used to hum this to me," she whispered, "when I was a baby." Julian didn't move. He was afraid the moment would vanish if he breathed too loudly. Then something truly unexplainable happened. Clara began to dance, slowly, awkwardly at first, then more fluid. Her arms mimicked movements she didn't consciously remember. Her eyes remained closed, and around her the air shifted. Julian saw them, 2 shadows, one male, one female. They weren't detailed, not ghosts, not visions, just outlines, moving with her, matching her steps, as if the past had been waiting for this moment to exhale. Clara danced with them for nearly a minute, then collapsed into Julian's arms, trembling. "They're gone," she whispered. "They finished. Bis. They never heard the music again. The gramophone stopped spinning, the jasmine scent disappeared. But the tape they'd recorded that night, Julian played it once. It had only one sound, a woman's voice, distant but unmistakable. "I remember you." Julian stood at the edge of the theater stage long after Clara had left, staring at the empty space where shadows had once danced. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from something more disorienting, a quiet, painful sense of awe, the kind that only comes when something sacred has touched the real world. The air was still again. No music, no scent of jasmine, just silence. But it wasn't the same kind of silence he'd heard when he first arrived. This silence felt complete, like a breath held too long that had finally been exhaled. He returned every day that week, always at 11 p.m., carrying the same recorder, always placing a single white rose on the stage. Nothing happened. The floor didn't creak. The gramophone didn't move. The shadows didn't return. Still, he didn't feel abandoned. He felt watched, no longer by someone waiting, but by someone grateful. In the village, people noticed. The old woman at the bakery smiled as he passed. Bethany at the archives told him someone had anonymously returned Eleanor Blanche's original costume, cleaned, pressed, and neatly folded, to the doorstep of the theater. He didn't ask who. He didn't need to. He began restoring the building in silence, not with heavy tools and noise, but gently, hand-sanding wood, cleaning mirrors with vinegar, rethreading the ropes of the red velvet curtains. Clara visited once, stood in the doorway and whispered she would have loved this. They didn't talk much after that, not because there was nothing left to say, but because everything that needed to be said had already passed between them, wordlessly, in the space between music and memory. As winter rolled in, snow blanketed the hills of St. Aurel, and the theater became a sanctuary again, not of performances, but of stillness. Then, one night, Julian found the letter. It was tucked between 2 floorboards beneath the dressing room vanity, yellowed by time but untouched by moisture. He didn't know how he'd missed it before. Or maybe he hadn't. Maybe he wasn't meant to find it until now. The envelope was blank, sealed with old wax. Inside, a single sheet of stationery with 3 sentences written in delicate, looping cursive. "I was never waiting for him to return. I was waiting for forgiveness for myself. To the one who finally heard me, you have set us free. Now, Dance your own story. Julian didn't cry, but something inside him softened in a way that felt like mourning and healing and letting go, all at once. That night, he didn't bring the recorder or the rose. He brought a small speaker and a playlist of old instrumental pieces he'd collected over the years but never played for anyone. Pieces that once meant nothing, now everything. He set the speaker in the center of the stage, pressed play, and stepped into the light. He didn't know the steps. He didn't try to mimic hers. He just moved the way he felt. It was ungraceful, clumsy at times, but honest. Halfway through the second track, he noticed the mirror. It wasn't a reflection of himself that startled him. It was a figure seated in the audience, motionless, watching. He turned. The seat was empty. He laughed softly and kept dancing. The theater, he thought, would never be truly empty again. Months passed. Spring crept into St. Aurel, turning white hills into wildflower meadows. The theater reopened quietly, not with a grand event, but with an open invitation. Locals came by, curious, unsure, some to see the renovations, some just to feel something. They walked the aisles, stood on the stage. Some cried, some smiled. Some didn't say anything at all. Julian didn't perform. He didn't want to. Instead, he offered space for music, for silence, for people to remember things they thought they'd forgotten. Clara returned once more, this time with an envelope of photographs. "I found these in my father's belongings," she said. "You should have them." They were images of Margaret, not Eleanor, smiling in the rain, leaning over a piano, holding a child, not more than 2 years old, both laughing, caught mid-motion. Julian kept them in a drawer near the stage, beside the tape recorder and the rose he'd dried and preserved in a small glass box. One evening, as the sun dipped low and golden across the hardwood floors, a girl walked in, maybe 16, hair in a bun, nervous, clutching a pair of old ballet slippers. "Do you still teach here?" she asked, eyes wide. Julian smiled. "We don't teach," he said, "but we listen. You want to dance?" She nodded. "Then the stage is yours." She moved with the kind of uncertainty that reminded him of himself, but within seconds her hesitation fell away. There was something ancient in the way she moved, not rehearsed, remembered. Afterward, she sat beside him on the edge of the stage, breathless. "Who was Eleanor Blanche?" she asked. Julian didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned his gaze to the chandelier above them, its crystals gently catching the fading light. "She was someone who danced long after the music stopped," he said, "and someone who finally found peace when someone else listened." The girl was quiet for a moment, then whispered, "I think I've seen her." Julian didn't ask what she meant. He only nodded. Some things are meant to be believed without explanation. That summer, Julian received a letter. No return address. Just a name at the bottom, Clara. Inside was a photo of Margaret and Joseph. It looked recent, not in age, but in presence, like it had been waiting to be found. The photo was taken at the edge of a lake. Both stood barefoot in the water, laughing. She wore a sundress. He held her hand like he'd never let it go again. On the back, Clara had written, "Thank you. I found what I came looking for, not in the past, but in the quiet you gave us all." Julian closed the letter and placed it beside the old tape, the rose, and the photographs. He looked around the empty theater, and this time it truly felt full. Years passed, people came and went, stories layered over stories. The theater became a haven for those who didn't know what they were looking for, only that they needed to feel something again. Some left flowers, others left notes. One man came every Wednesday to sit silently in the third row. A widow danced alone on the stage every year on her wedding anniversary. No one questioned it. No one interrupted. Julian never reopened it commercially. No ticket sales, no promotions. It wasn't that kind of place anymore. It had become something else, a quiet cathedral of memory and meaning. He aged with it. Lines formed around his eyes, silver spread through his beard. But something in his eyes never dimmed. Maybe because he had once touched the past, and it had touched him back. He never married, never left the village, and when people asked him why he stayed, he'd smile and say only, "Because something here once danced for me," and they would understand, or they wouldn't. Either way, he never explained. On the evening of his 80th birthday, the villagers lit candles outside the theater, dozens of them, a quiet tribute to the man who had once restored more than just a building. Inside, Julian sat alone on the stage, knees a bit weaker now, hands slower, but mind still sharp. He placed the old recorder beside him. It still worked. He pressed play. A faint sound played, the same track that once moved Clara to dance. But this time, he didn't dance. He just sat, eyes closed, smiling. Somewhere in the space between memory and melody, two shadows moved across the floor. And this time, they weren't alone. They had been waiting, and they had come for the final dance. Did you enjoy this story? Don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Enjoy and comment below about your experience listening to this story.